Thank you.
Well, some days I work in 12.
Okay. Do you want me to, can I start or you want me to
Yeah,
wait?
no, feel free to so as people come in,
Okay,
you might want to mute them all,
okay,
so it won't be the background noise.
okay.
Click on that. So as they come in, like click all now. Yeah, so hopefully they're muted. This is sort of like a microphone.
Okay.
And then if you want to share your face.
Now.
click that. Okay,
That's good.
I'll be right back.
Okay. Hi guys.
Hey.
Okay, so thanks for coming. We were supposed to have food and then things happened. Okay, so we're going to talk today about tips for studying the exam, just to kind of give you some familiarization with what to expect when you take the exam. Okay, so some initial things about taking the test. It's completely computer-based, right? You get 4 hours to take it, and you have to go to one of those test-taking centers, like I'm sure many of you have had to do for either your GRE, SATs, like a Pearson center. So you do have to actually, once you register and submit all of your stuff through the board and get approval to sit for the exam, then you'll go and contact that third party to actually arrange taking the exam. And depending on when you apply, there are specific windows that the exam is available during. It's only available 3 times a year, and all of that information you'll be given when you actually submit all of your application materials and things like that. So it's 4 hours. There are 150, there's actually 160 questions, 150 of which are graded on. Every exam, they pilot 10 new questions, so you don't get told which 10 questions don't count per se. Those are used for informational purposes for the psychometric testing. They don't, so, and it's also not like they like drop 10 questions that you don't get right or anything like that. There's just, those 10 kind of pilot questions stuck in there. Every question is a multiple choice question with 4 choices. And all of the questions are based on the task list. So this is kind of the breakdown of how many questions you'll be asked on each content area of the task list. The task list is our 4th edition task list. It's available on the BACB. And because we have a BACB approved curriculum, our courses are designed so that all of the task list items are covered in one course or another, if not multiple times. So none of it should be remotely new. But it is important, I think, to go back through all of the different content areas and then reflect back on all of your different course materials. This way you can see, it seems like, we had a lot of, overlap on this in multiple classes, but this was only maybe covered in one class, so really refreshing your memory on those specific things. And then when you're looking at the task list within each content areas, so measurement, experimental design, etc., there's different sub-objectives. So just like when you get objectives for class, if you go through and you design your studying around mastering all of those objectives, you'll note nothing is going to be asked on the exam that's outside of the task list. And then with regards to the 10 pilot questions, how those are distributed, like that's all secret essentially. So if it seems like you're getting a disproportionate number of questions on one specific topic area, then maybe those are the ones that they're piloting. They don't give out any information like that. When you take the exam, like I said, you go in there, you get 4 hours, and the 4 hours starts from the moment that you walk into that room with the computer. So the time that you're spending, getting acclimated, reading the instructions, all of that all counts within the 4 hours. 2, if you need to go and take a bathroom break or anything like that, that's actually the only reason they let you leave the room is to take a bathroom break. That's all within the 4 hours. So, the timing doesn't get paused or anything like that. You can't bring anything in with you, but they do give you, some scratch paper and a dry erase board and stuff like that, but you can't bring anything in else. So one thing that I would really, I think you can have like a walk-on or something like that, but for people who get stressed out when you're taking the test, I think one of the really important things to do is to pace yourself as you're going through it, because it's not like with a sheet of paper you can kind of see in one, the scope of all the questions you have to get through. You're clicking through one question at a time. So it's easy, I think, to lose track of time and not realize how much time, how many more questions you have left to go and things like that. You can navigate forward and backwards through the questions. So if you want to skip one and come back to it, you can do that. Be mindful that if you are running short on time, you may not get the opportunity to do that. So we're going to talk about some different strategies in a minute of pacing yourself and keeping track of all that. But just wanted to make sure you saw that some of these areas are going to be more heavily covered. So like the fundamental elements of behavior change, those are going to be more densely covered. And really, it's because when you look at the task list and all of those objectives under each content area, some of them have way more than others. So that's why it's not like we think this is more important than that or something like that. The test is designed by behavior analysts. All the questions are written by a committee of behavior analysts that are chosen by the BACB. It goes through a lot of rigorous psychometric testing. So I want to say that hopefully that means that they're written well, but I can only, comment on when I took the test, and I was just like, this question can go a lot of different ways. So we're going to kind of talk about that. You get informed 45 days of the first examination date. So usually examination dates are like the first to the last day of the month, so like May 1st to May 31st. So you'll get informed within 45 days of May 1, for example. Everyone gets informed on the same day. You get an email, and if you pass it, they just say you pass. They don't give you a score. They don't give you any type of feedback. It's just you pass. Congratulations. If you don't pass, they will give you a percentage of correctly answered items for each of these different areas, so that in the future when you go to take a test, when you go to take it again, you'll know, oh, these are the areas that I really need to study on. There's not a specific score that's passing. How they do it is, and this is very similar to a lot of tests like this, they basically look at where like the biggest break in scores is, and that's how they determine what the passing criteria is. So I know a lot of people talk about like, oh, I missed it by 5 points or something like that. And when I took the test, they didn't give us any feedback period, so I can't comment on that. But it's not to say like you missed 5 questions or something like that. So I just want to make sure that you don't kind of read too much into those details when you get, if you don't pass and you get that type of email. You can't appeal the grade in any way, and one of like the biggest rules about taking the test is that you can't disseminate any of the information with regards to like the content of the questions or anything like that. So one of the things I think that feeds into this is the fact that you can't appeal it. You can't say like, oh, I remember this specific question and I don't think it was fair, or this, that, and the other thing. So obviously, it is a time test, and that carries with it the stress of taking a time test. But the questions themselves can be really lengthy. So it's not like a, what's the definition of this type question. The questions can be really lengthy. They're often presented as vignettes of information. And I think one of the things that students have reported that they struggled the most with was that by the time they read the whole question, they didn't really know, kind of what it was asking, and the way that the 4 answer choices are presented, all 4 of those answers may be true, but not actually answering the question. So all of the questions are going to be one of those choose the best answer. So I think one of the greatest strategies that you can use is, you reading the entire question and then using your dry erase board or your note paper to go back and really highlight, okay, what exactly are they asking me? I see this as an instructor with students taking tests all the time when we present you vignettes of information, and you respond with things that are totally true about behavior analysis, but in no way answer the question. And I want you to know that those are going to be the types of answer choices that they give you, because they want to give you the correct answer and then 4 very close in non-examples, because they're testing that you have that, that precise level of discrimination to determine what the correct answer is. And from an instructional design perspective, that means that you have actually mastered the material. So the questions are designed in that way. There shouldn't be any of those situations where you're just like, well, this is a blanket, wrong example or wrong answer. If you're thinking that, then you should probably go back and reread the question, because they should all be, kind of, making sense in one way or the other. So with that being said, when you're unpacking these questions, you really want to try not to overthink it. And in some sense, I feel like, our schooling up until this point has really reinforced us giving approximations of answers, because a lot of times we get partial credit for things, right? This is not one of those instances. It is all or nothing. So that's why you really need to focus on exactly what is this answering, or what is this asking, and how do each of these answers that are provided respond, meet that question that they're asking. I think one of the tendencies too that has been, again, reinforced in our schooling, I can think of especially when taking the SAT and stuff like that, is that working backwards approach. So reading the answers and then going back and reflecting on the question, and I really, really encourage you not to do that, because if you read the answers and then go back to the question, it's going to bias you and skew you in interpreting the question potentially in the wrong way. So if anything, I would say read the question, unpack it, pick apart those important details, what is it exactly answering, and then try to come up with your own answer before even considering the answers that are there. If you come up with an answer that matches one of the choices that they gave you, that's pretty good IOA, right? Whereas if you're looking at the answers and then going back to the question and saying, well, this kind of makes sense, I can see this fitting this piece of it, yeah. Nope, don't do that. Mm-hmm. The other thing is that, I've heard from a lot of students is kind of like filling in details with vignettes. Well, if this was going on in this situation, then that would make A true, but if this other detail of the situation was going on, then that would make C true. Don't don't kind of read between the lines, don't add any of that extra information. The questions are written such that you should be able to answer it just with the information provided. And again, I think that this is something that's in our repertoire as a result of how, we've been taking, especially open-ended tests. In our program, a lot of times, if you provide that additional rationale for why you're giving that answer, you're likely to get partial credit, and that is actually going to shoot you in the foot on this type of test. Now, further kind of feeding into that history, there's a comment area for each question. Now, the comment area and anything that you write in it does not actually get taken into consideration when they're grading the test. The grade is, automatically done by the computer, and then what the comment area that they use for actually is later when they're evaluating the questions and saying, in this cohort of people that all took, the May 2016 test, a lot of people got question 5 wrong, and then they're going to look at the comment area and see if anyone provided maybe anecdotal information on something that was unclear or confusing or something like that. So it's nice that you have this opportunity to give feedback on the question, but that's eating into your time taking the test, and it is in no way going to affect your grade as an individual on that test. If anything, it just may change how they present the question in the future. So especially if you are tight on time, or if you're going to fall into that trap of thinking you can kind of rationalize your way, to support your answer or whatever, I think that can be a big time waster. And I know a lot of students have kind of misinterpreted the comment area as, a spot to provide rationale, and that's not what it's for. You need to answer every single question. There's obviously no points for blanks. It's not that like weird scoring system where it's better to leave it blank than to answer it wrong. So make sure you answer every single question. If you have no idea, right, or if you're going back and forth between two answers or something like that, you can flag the questions in the system so that you can come back to them. You can obviously also make notes of which ones you want to come back to. And so one thing that I think is useful is if you're stuck and you're going to ruminate on that and going back and forth between two questions, just flag it, right? And I think you can flag it in the system so it kind of highlights which number you need to come back to. But on your kind of note paper, write down the number and then maybe what it was about. So functional assessment, measurement, whatever. Because as you progress forward through the questions, something may come up in one of the other questions that is one of those like, oh, right, that extra bit of stimulus prompt, and then you can quickly go back to that question, answer it, and then move forward. I think that's, a lot of times with long tests in general, we say you can read through all the questions. A lot of times you can get, find some prompts and answers within other questions. However, if you don't kind of keep those notes for yourself, you're going to end up flipping back through every single question that you flagged, which again could be a big time waster. And as I said, the best answer, all the answers to some degree are going to have some aspect of correctness to them. So always keeping that at the forefront of your mind is the best strategy. So in figuring out what to study, the 4th edition task list, as I said, is essentially the outline of all the objectives of everything that's going to be covered on it. But it's not going to be a bunch of very simple, cut and dry definition answers and things like that. So I do think it's important that you really practice using vignettes, responding to longer questions, especially if the majority of the content on those objectives that was covered in class was more cut and dry. So, in ABA 1, we do a lot of vignette work. I don't know if it's the same way in concepts and O&M. So you really should try to, get those practice with questions that are going to mirror what's going to be on the test. When I post this PowerPoint for you guys, and I'll send everyone the link. So the Cooper Here and Here textbook site actually has a lot of study materials built into it, a lot of vignette questions and things like that. So I think that's a great site because, well, for one, it's free, and it actually gives you the correct answers. And I think on there's even some practice, not like practice BCBA exams, but like practice exams that like instructors can give for each of those separate chapters. And there is in the answer keys rationale for correct answers, which I think is a really important aspect of studying. Milton Berger's Behavior Modifications, Principles and Procedures text. I have a couple of copies in my office if anyone wants to borrow them and make photocopies and things like that. But at the end of all the chapters in his text, there's also quizzes and vignettes and things like that. So, you don't have to reinvent the wheel so much. Again, going back through old class materials, but I think the most important thing when you're looking at all these materials is really understanding why is the right answer right, because that's going to get you more fluent at the in-depth level of analysis that you need when answering questions that have a lot of very similar, possibly correct answers. And then obviously, we have staff meds from a lot of our classes. If you are not fluent in all of the terminology, that's really going to slow you down on the test, because while they may not be asking you explicit definition questions, all of the jargon is going to be embedded within the vignette. So if you're not fluent in the jargon and you're misinterpreting it, or you're slowing yourself down trying to remember, what's an NCR or something like that, then that's going to eat up time and also potentially lead to you misunderstanding the question, getting to the wrong answer. Again, with how the questions and the answer choices are designed, they're going to put in an answer that would be right, say, if you misunderstood some key component part of the question. So really getting fluent with all those terms. So when you're trying to figure out how to study, this is obviously not a time to cram, 2 years of classes into, a night, a week, etc. of studying. A lot of people take a very graduated approach and study over the course of multiple weeks, if not multiple months. When you're studying, though, there's studying and then there's practicing taking the exam. You need to be practicing taking the exam for the full duration of time, 150 questions at a time, the same types of questions with 4 answers, because the more you recreate the test conditions, the better you are equipped to not have all these fluency blockers in place in the moment because of the test conditions. So, the stress, the length, etc. So I think it's, this is something we really coach our doctoral students on when they have to take their comprehensive exams, because they have to sit and write for 8 hours straight. Fatigue is a very real thing. I think a lot of times, if you guys think about final exams that you take in class, where you're sitting there just for that entire 2 or 3 hours, and afterwards, I know everyone's just like, this is, double that, and I don't know if you've ever had a class where you've taken a 150 question exam. So really recreating that as much as possible. Create those test conditions and then take those practice tests in the presence of someone else, because then you are accountable. You can't stop. You can't, take a, 5-second break and check your phone. And I think whenever we create more accountability around how we're studying, how we're taking these practice tests, it's going to even more set you up for success in the actual situation. Keeping track of pace. So as you're setting up your practice test conditions, which questions did you spend the most time on? Which content areas did those align with? Because that's going to tell you which content areas you need to go back and study more on so you can be more fluent in. So that being said, I'm going to go through some different study materials that are commercially available. But when you are taking the test with someone, you can ask them to time you as you go through each question. It's also something really easy that you can self-monitor. So I know when I was practicing taking the test, I had my my clock out, and then I would just write whatever minute I started the next question on, so I could see, okay, for this one there was a 5-minute and a response time. For this one, it was only 1 minute. The length of the questions does vary, so obviously that factors into it some, but I think more so than anything else, really seeing how long it's taking you to sit, read the vignette questions, unpack them, and then get that answer and move on. The other thing that I think is really helpful, especially if you're taking the test and a lot of other members of your cohort are taking it, if you can take the test together, because that creates, again, that accountability to sit and do it for the entire 4 hours. But also then afterwards, and after you go through and score it, you can walk through those different questions and see, okay, why did we all get such varying answers on this one, and unpacking it further. Oh, you thought the question was asking this. This person thought the question was asking something else. What was it actually asking? Some of the study materials that I'll show you about actually have that information and give you the rationale and the feedback on why what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong, but not all of them do. So if that's something that you really think would be a benefit to you, carefully consider which study materials you invest your money in, because some of them are expensive. And then, constantly checking each other when you're, going through and reviewing these answers. Did you overthink this? As you're discussing the questions with one another, do you hear each other adding in those details that weren't actually in the question, that filling in between the lines type stuff? Because the more that we can kind of call our attention to one another doing this, the more we can be aware of this behavior when it happens in the moment and kind of stop ourselves. I think if you catch yourself doing that on the exam, flag it, move on, and then come back to it so you can have a fresh set of eyes. Okay, so all of these links, like I said, when I send you the PowerPoint, will be clickable. There are some mock exams available through Florida Institute of Technology. So they send you the exam, and I think you have a week to take it or something like that on the computer, as soon as you open it to take it, it is timed. You can only take it once, and I think it's $120. So this is going to be, something that you want to sit and commit to. They give you feedback on the specific content areas, similar to what the BCB gives you when you get your test results if you didn't pass, but they're not going to give feedback per question. So that may be something that might sway you in one direction or the other. Similarly, there's another mock exam available, but this is not, if I'm recalling correctly, a computer-based one. It's a paper one that you get. So I think there's a little bit less kind of accountability and pressure from the timing aspect of that. So it's less recreating the test conditions. And with this one, they actually give you question by question, correct, incorrect, but they don't give you any explanation for correct or incorrect. So depending on the verbal community that you're in, if you are working in an agency that has BCBAs there and they're willing to kind of go through some of this stuff with you and help you work it out, that's great. I think if you're not in a strong verbal community and you're kind of by yourself when you're studying, it doesn't really help just to know something is correct or incorrect if you don't know why it's correct or incorrect. And I will say that I'm not endorsing or not endorsing any of these. I'm not affiliated with any of these. This is just some of the stuff that I found when I was researching study materials that are available. The BDS training modules are another commercially available, not a mock exam, but it is a time-based, content area-based tutorial, and you have to actually get 100% on each of the different modules before it will let you progress forward through them. So it's nice in that it's not like you can skip around to what's easy for you. You really do have to go through the gamut of all the information, and every time you retake it, it shuffles the questions and gives you new questions. It's timed. So it is very, very comprehensive, to the point that a lot of students get frustrated with it because it's hard, but I think that's the point. I was actually just at a presentation with the guy who owns this company, and they continuously, are taking in information because it's all done on the computer now. So they're taking information about like how much time people are spending on this question versus that question. Is this a product of this content area not being covered enough in graduate coursework, or is this a product of the question not being worded good, or things like that? So from a behavior analytic perspective, there's a lot of feedback that's going in, and as that feedback is applied, it generates, and then you get to experience the benefits of that feedback in the modules. It's one of the more expensive ones. Last time I checked, it was about $300, but they actually have last time I checked, they had a money back guarantee that if you don't pass, then they give you your money back. So their whole thing is that if you do all of the modules to proficiency, so you can't just buy it, you have to actually do all the modules to proficiency, and you don't pass, then I think they give you your money back, something like that. So I kind of feel like if someone is willing to put their business profits on the line because they trust they trust their product so well, I think that's great. And it's done by a behavior analyst, and he's skilled in instructional design. And when I was at this presentation with him, he was actually saying that I think 72 universities now or something like that actually buy the modules and use them as a curriculum supplement. So the other thing is, like, this has been vetted by a lot of other academics to be a worthwhile resource. Pass the big ABA exam. Not gonna lie, don't remember what this one is about. Internet site reports. Okay. I'm gonna check through all these links before I post them and make sure they work. But if I recall correctly, this is another one where it's online training modules. I don't know that it takes in live data like the BDS modules do, but far cheaper. So, you get what you pay for, kind of. Now, so these are all kind of self-paced, do it on your own time type study methods, right? On the other side of things, there are more interactive coaching and tutorials and almost like intensive boot camp type things that you can go to. The majority of them are online through webinars and things like that. So along with their mock exam, Florida Institute of Technology has a guided review and tutoring. Same thing, Global Autism Project's review sessions and scholar sessions, which a lot of times if you follow Global Autism Project, they have drawings and raffles where you can kind of win a seat in these sessions, which is nice. And they also do a lot of kind of like one-off webinars. So you can do one of those, see if this is a style of communication and tutorial and things like that that you like and that you work well with before you make an investment into one of their more intensive camps. Because these are not going to be like one-day things. These are going to be spread over a longer course of time, typically multiple weeks. And then on the BACB site, there is a link called examination preparation, I think, and you can click on that. And these are not companies that the BACB has vetted by any means. It's just like they are advertising that they are offering coaching. Some of these are in the format of kind of like these intensive boot camp type things where you're in it with multiple other people, but I know at least a couple of them is like one-on-one coaching and tutoring and taking practice exams with a BCBA kind of monitoring you remotely through, you know, a Skype webinar type thing. Obviously, the more individualized and the more intensive your services, you know, your coaching is and things like that, the more expensive it's going to be. So I think it's really important that you think about in your, you know, your collective history, taking, not just in graduate school, but in taking these high stakes tests in situations like these, what has worked best for you. Because taking the exam is a financial commitment in and of itself. You know, you pay that money to take it, and then every time, if you don't pass, every time you retake it, not only are you paying the money to retake it, but typically that's until you pass, you're not getting your salary bumps and things like that. So I think it's important not to do like, well, I'm just going to see how I do, and then if I don't do well, I'm going to, you know, invest in one of these intensive coaching things and stuff like that. The other thing is all of the research that's coming out of the BACB shows that each subsequent time that you need to take the test, your likelihood of passing it goes down. So it's not, and this is not a situation where you get better with practice. Each subsequent time that you take it, you are less likely to pass it. So I think it's really important to put your best foot forward because there's so much that's going to go on if you don't pass the test in terms of all of, you know, your private events, responding and things like that, and then kind of getting over that hump of saying, okay, I'm going to start studying again, get myself back in the groove, and take it again. And the other thing that happens is the longer that takes and gets put off, the further and further you are from being in the academic setting where you have been required to be constantly demonstrating fluency with all of this content level knowledge. I think, you know, whether you're in practicum or you're already out there working, you're probably already starting to experience how there's a lot of drift in the applied field with regards to speaking accurately, technically, and really critically evaluating all of these different situations that may be presented in the vignette. And so I don't want your repertoire to shift so much because it's been so shaped by that specific applied environment that you've been in that, you know, you kind of are losing some of those more holistic skills that we've really tried to work on while you were in school. So each time you take it, you're less likely to pass. The longer that you wait to take it, the less likely you are to pass. So the further you are from this very enriched verbal community in terms of time, the harder it's going to be to get back in that groove, so to speak. So I know a lot of people are just like, I'm busy with work, I'm just going to wait, you know, until the next round or whatever, and, you know, life keeps coming, getting in the way. And then we have students who just, you know, waited a year, but then that was the year, the task list changed, and then now their coursework doesn't count or, you know, got all wonky. So don't do that. Okay, so in thinking about all of the different study materials and things like that that are available, I think, go through all those links, research all those different things, read the reviews. There's a lot of different ABA Facebook groups, whether it's for professionals or for students, and I always see conversations on those groups of, how are people studying, what's worked best for you. So really, I think soliciting feedback from other people and seeing, what their experiences have been, because I don't know that just going on any of these websites, you're going to see the negative, comments. Obviously, this is those businesses, so they're going to put their best foot forward. But, everyone, I think, has, study methods that work better or worse for them. So talking to other people and figuring out what's worked best for them before you drop a whole bunch of money on these different tutorials and things like that. So the other thing that is available online, and again, just sources of information and thinking about how to prepare yourself, there's various web pages from, great behavior analysts that talk about different behavior analytic strategies for self-managing your study, getting through the content area. If, a specific content area, experimental design, is really what keeps tripping you up, these are some great, resources that you should go to delve further into that, which I think is going to help you feel not so overwhelmed and like, oh, so I just need to go and reread the Cooper book or, reread every textbook I've had. So I think there's a lot of great stuff out there that's published already to help you really study in the most efficient way possible. That's going to help you contact the most reinforcement in studying, because it's an extremely overwhelming process to think about that you could be tested on anything that we've taught you in the past 2 years. And so I think that tends to be the biggest fluency blocker. And again, being very, very proactive in how long before the test you start studying and things like that. So again, before this is posted, I will double check all these links and make sure they work. And then for the Global Autism Project YouTube page, this is, I think, a great source to go through and view their different videos and see if that's something, because I know they get really good reviews for their intensive scholar camp, but it is expensive. So I think, as much research as you can do ahead of time to see if that's going to be a study method that's worthwhile for you is good. And I don't think anyone offers a money-back thing like BDS does. Take that for what it's worth. And they have on the BDS website, I think they have like their pass rate data for people who have taken the exam who have used their study materials. And I used their study materials back when it was on a CD-ROM. So again, like I said, this is not something that you should cram for. If you're thinking about this in general, this is our field's one gateway of competency for professionals. The pass rate in general is not high. It's like 67%, I think, which sounds really scary. But for me as a professional, I think it's important that we have very stringent, exam like this because of all of the vulnerable populations that we are likely to work with. I think it's really important that if this is the only one test that we have right now, that it's something that is stringent. So that's why I know when I'm on those Facebook discussions, a lot of people talk about how it seems like it's more difficult than it should be, especially people who have been working a while and kind of came back to get their BCBA because now it's a more popular credential. If you can't pass the test, you have to think about, should I be working independently? Because once you get those magic 4 letters after your name, we are all regarded by consumers as equivalent, right? So when a consumer comes to a company and is contracting your services, they don't ask for my CV. They're not asking for your CV. They have no idea if we've been doing this 10 years or 10 months. how many times we took the exam, how many times it took us to pass or anything like that. So I think it's really important for us to be, honest with ourselves and say, okay, if I didn't pass this, what does that mean about my repertoire? Do I need to be seeking out more supervision if I am currently working? Do I need to, go and do more continuing ed things and, kind of surround myself with more behavior analysts to enrich my verbal community? Because it's not just going to be an artifact of like the questions weren't worded well or it was stressful or things like that. I think it's important that we're very honest with our skill sets. And then if you don't pass, that's okay, but don't fall into that rut of avoiding the test again, or fall into that rut of thinking, what does that mean about you as a behavior analyst and things like that. Because again, the longer that you wait and the more times that it takes you to take the exam, the harder it is that's going to be. The harder it will be to pass. So, that's what I got for you. Do you guys have any questions about the test itself, what to expect, or?
Do you have any recommendations on, like, do you know if any of these options have, like, things to listen to while we study, like when driving a lot?
Like podcasts?
Yeah, or like SouthMed stuff recorded, like do you suggest we do our own recordings and listen to it, or are there options out there where it's already been done for you?
I don't know. I know there are a lot of BCBAs who have started podcasts now, and so I would think that there are some available now just on like content level knowledge. But even if you're just listening to a bunch of behavior analysts talk about behavior analysis, that's you putting yourself in that verbal community, and if anything, that often prompts us to start thinking about things in different ways, talking with our colleagues about anything that we heard. So I think that's a great idea. And even, like I watched, there's Western Michigan has on their webpage these really great interviews, like long interviews, like 2-3 hour interviews with various professionals in our field, their specific areas of specialty and things like that. And while the focus of it is talking about, say like pediatric feeding disorders or that, like something, a very specific niche, just hearing them talk and how they conceptualize things is just more exposure to the jargon and kind of that big picture analysis of behavior. So the more that you can expose yourself to that, if you're hunkering down for a long ride on the metro, you can easily pull those videos up on your phone and stuff like that. And I think that's a great way to with very minimal effort, just kind of, incorporate more exposure into your life. Especially if you're working and you're commuting a lot, to and from clients and things like that, and you're going to have the radio on anyways, might as well have a few talk radio. Yeah. I know a couple different people that have been talking about podcasts that they've come across lately that they really like. So I'll try to get a list together and I can add that to the PowerPoint.
Do you know about, like, if we have to get recertified if we move out of state?
Okay, so the certification is a national certification, international actually, but specific states do have licensure, and licensure and certification is different. Most states' licensure bills is written such that what qualifies you to sit for the BCBA exam, and then obviously passing the BCBA exam, is equivalent to your needs for licensure, but there are a few states. I think most recently I was talking to someone about Arizona. So Arizona's like practicum requirement is 1,500 hours. They don't take into consideration any weighting. So I think it's important that if you are moving to a state that requires licensure, not only to familiarize yourself with those requirements, but also know that if you do, I don't think there's any states right now where it's written that you can like meet the requirements but not pass the exam and be licensed, right? So you need to have the certification and the license ultimately, or you can't practice, or otherwise you can only practice as a technician essentially. And this is something that a lot of states are having to adapt to very quickly because of the way that the licensure laws are written. If you are practicing behavior analysis, even if you're not billing through insurance, you can get fined or worse if you don't meet those requirements. So, and that's the whole point of licensure, for consumer protection, so that people aren't practicing that shouldn't be. But the way that all of the states thus far, and the way that Illinois is writing the bill, is so that like the education and training requirements mirror those of the board. This way, anytime the board updates their requirements, the state doesn't have to rewrite the bill. So,
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then on the BCB's website, they have a link that talks about all of the states that require licensure or in the process of getting licensure. And so you can click on that. It'll lead you to the actual bills, and so you can see the actual jargon and things like that, so that you're prepared, you know, for when you move to that state, getting that application together and all that stuff. Anything else? Yay, tests. All right, well, thank you guys for coming.
Thank you so much for having me.
Like I said, I'm going to just go through the PowerPoint, make sure everything works. I'll get those podcast resources on here, and then I will post this on the Practicum website under our important documents. And the PowerPoint will be there, and I'll put the recording up as well.